So first of all, thank you so much for giving us this opportunity to let us know what's going on over there.
No, thank you for having me, and thank you for also putting the spotlight on the situation in Ukraine.
First of all, Elizabeth, as we enter the fourth year of the conflict, we've seen countless stories of resilience and immense suffering as well. Can you, first of all, maybe share a specific story of a family or a child that you've encountered in Ukraine who's deeply affected by the destruction of infrastructure, by the bombings? Then, of course, how did their experience, in your opinion, reflect the broader challenges faced by the communities in this Ukraine conflict zone?
Yeah, no, I was actually traveling just last week to the south of Ukraine and some of the regions there, Mykolaiv and Kherson, that are extremely impacted by what is going on. And I met this older couple, both 75 years old, whose small village was extremely close to the front line in the beginning of the full-scale invasion. And they were telling me how they had to hide in the basement for weeks when they could hear the hostilities happening above them. And they ended up taking that very difficult decision that they had to leave their home and flee. And the woman, Vera, she was crying when she was recalling that moment when they had to decide to leave their home. This was such a traumatic experience for her, that decision of leaving your house, leaving your home, locking the door, not knowing when you're going to come back. So they had to flee. They never left Ukraine. They were internally displaced in the country like millions of others. But now, after that area was retaken by Ukraine, they were able to actually return home. Their house was completely damaged by, like, that's the case for millions of private homes that have been damaged and destroyed in the war. So they received some assistance from us in UNHCR to repair their house and have been able to come back. And of course, they are still extremely anxious and nervous about the war still continuing. They still hear the attacks. They still have the drones. And they're, of course, anxious about the future. But for them to be able to return home, that also really showed that strength and the resilience of the Ukrainian people, and also that hope for the future. So it was really a visit that made such a huge impression on me, hearing that horrible, sad story, but also them being able to return now, and of course hoping for the best for the future.
Now, the conflict has disproportionately affected vulnerable groups such as women, children, the elderly, and people with disabilities. Can you share some examples of how UNHCR has supported these communities, and what interventions have made a tangible impact on these communities and their lives?
Yeah, no, exactly as you say, we are really seeing the impact being very severe on the vulnerable groups. And I just wanted to mention, because right now it's been 3 years of full-scale war, and it is continuing. Just in the last 6 months, we've seen more than 200,000 people fleeing or being evacuated from some of those regions close to the shifting front line or the border regions. And a lot of those people are exactly very vulnerable. It's older people, it's people with disabilities, people with low mobility, some of those who have not been able to flee on their own, and they're now being helped by volunteers, by NGOs to be evacuated. And many of them are fleeing with almost nothing, almost no belongings. So it is extremely basic assistance they need. They need a bed to sleep in, they need roof over their head. And we are working, of course, alongside many other humanitarians and supporting the government-led response, but we are working to ensure that our assistance is prioritized for the most vulnerable. There are currently 12.7 million people in Ukraine who need humanitarian assistance. And even if we are working very hard alongside many others, of course, it's impossible to reach all because the needs are so immense. So we are very much prioritizing the most vulnerable.
Talking about vulnerable people, I need to show you something a little bit. This is a postcard from UNHCR China office. I do have friends, from Vano to his successor. UNHCR colleagues have been working very closely with us in really amplifying the voices rather of people like these. So help us understand small children. For them, it could be 3 years of what I believe deprived years of kindergarten. For those young adolescents, 3 years of deprived primary school or middle school. As a father of two, I can't imagine what's going on. So tell us about it.
Yeah, no, exactly. I mean, in everything that is happening, really, let's remember the humanitarian side, the human toll, the human cost for all those people who are really affected. And exactly as you say, we are seeing now generations of children who are growing up in wartime. We've seen more than 3,600 schools and education facilities that have been damaged and destroyed. So that means that a lot of children are not even in school right now. I mean, if we just recall back to COVID times where a lot of children were not going to school in across the world, all the discussions about how this also affects children's mental health if they don't have the ability to physically interact with other children. So it is really a very severe impact on children. I also want to mention the separation. We have so many Ukrainian families who have been separated, where children are maybe with their mother, not their father, families who are fleeing also outside of the country to seek safety out elsewhere. Maybe the grandparents are left behind in Ukraine. So many families have been separated, and that is also really affecting people's mental health.
Let's talk about aid workers such as yourself. We understand that UNHCR staff face immense challenges operating in conflict zones, such as Ukraine. But before our interview started, you shifted, several locations to find a place where you are now to talk to us on the hub on CGTN. So much appreciated. So maybe you can start by telling us where you are, why did you choose this position? Like we said, at any time, bombings and stuff, and you
Yeah.
could move at any moment.
Yeah. No, I mean, I am in Kiev, in the capital of Ukraine. And while Kiev is also attacked, I mean, currently it's every single night there are drones attacking Kiev. So I have to take shelter. You can hear the explosion also from the air defense. With everything happening now in Ukraine, I am Danish myself. I'm European. For me, this is something happening in Europe that will probably be a defining moment for Europe. And I thought it was really important for me to be here. I don't think that I alone am saving the world, but if I can just contribute a little bit, and I think that is also the case for many of my colleagues, not only in Ukraine, but across the world, that what we can contribute with our skills and our time, it's really about the people. And traveling around in Ukraine, meeting people, hearing their stories, seeing the gratitude of the assistance they receive from us. This is really what motivates me and what keeps me going. How we are making a difference in people's lives. And actually, a lot of times when I meet people who have maybe had their house repaired, they've maybe received some basic aid items, they've maybe received we give also cash assistance, so people get a little amount of money to buy the most necessary for them, food, medicine, and they at the same time support the local economy. But it's more than just a physical aid. I hear so many times from, we call them here old babushkas, older grandmothers, saying now we also know that we are not forgotten in Ukraine. There are people sitting outside in the world who are remembering what is happening here, who is thinking of us and who is supporting us. So it's more than the physical aid, it's also that mental support that people receive when we are able to help them and provide different assistance to them.
Great work. I mean, thank you so much. I'm Chinese. I'm not in a war zone, but still, I want to thank you for what you and your team have done. But if you think about it, the lives of these people, of the displaced people, are really at the mercy of politics. Recently, there have been this negotiation going on in Riyadh, Saudi Arabia, talking about a post-war situation in Ukraine. History repeats itself. If you think about the great power rivalry dividing Germany after the war, World War II dividing Vietnam, dividing Korea into two or more parts, result of great power politics. And now it's all happening all over again in Ukraine.
We are not part of those negotiations and discussions, and I cannot comment on them on behalf of UNHCR. What I can say is that for us, our focus is really on the people, on our ability to continue to deliver critical assistance to those millions of people who are in need of it. And I think that would be my message in the midst of all those political discussions that are happening on the high level, on the global scale, to really remember the human perspective in this. It's the civilians who are paying the highest cost. There are thousands of civilians who have lost their lives in Ukraine in this war. Many, many more have been injured, have lost their homes, have been forced to flee their communities, have been separated from family members. So it is really that human toll that I think is so important to remember. And we've seen in the last 3 years an immense solidarity and support to the Ukrainian people in this very, very horrific and difficult situation. And I think now is not the time to forget about Ukraine and to forget about the Ukrainian people. So that is, let's say, my message for the international community to continue that support to Ukraine. There are millions of people here who need that support.
Let's talk about the economic situation in Ukraine. I mean, the country's economy was, kind of impacted by COVID and its export in particular. And now with the conflicts happening over there, lasting over 3 years, what are the business owners that you've met and the enterprises that you've seen over there? Is there still a functioning market economy? What's going on there economic wise?
I mean, there's no doubt that the economy is, of course, also severely impacted by what has happened here for the last 3 years. And I mean, even longer, the war started in 2014. What we have seen is that, especially in the east of the country, which is the frontline regions, there are some agricultural, industrial hubs there that have been completely devastated. It's the estimate that 30% of all jobs before the war have been lost. So of course this is affecting the entire country's economy, but it's also really affecting the population, the people and the families who are already affected by living through a war, the threat of the attacks. So of course, let's say the strain on the economy is also really what is at the same time exacerbating the situation for a lot of people.
Two key words to describe what you've been through, what you've seen in Ukraine, and your messages to the international community, to our audience worldwide watching this show.
I think my first word would be devastation, because it's devastating lives here. Amount of suffering I've witnessed and I've heard from people, and just the physical devastation of so many homes destroyed, driving through villages where you just see everything is impacted by attacks. Every fence is holed by the shelling and the shrapnels. So devastation really, but then also resilience, because I'm every day impressed by the strength and the resilience of the Ukrainian people and trying to rebuild their lives, trying to aim for having as normal lives as it's even possible in this situation. We have people who have been displaced from their homes, who are starting a new place, starting their own businesses, actually, entrepreneurs who are trying to rebuild, having success in starting a fresh and new place. And I don't want to think of the people here as only being in need. They need a helping hand, but they are extremely strong. So with that helping hand, that also makes it possible for people to start that recovery and rebuilding.
Elisabeth Haslund, UNHCR spokesperson in Ukraine. Thank you so much for talking to us, ma'am.